there was like 10 grand that was missing from our accounts, and there was like
Mm.
another 10 grand that was failing with this credit card. And it's like, why is this like happening? And while that was happening, I also felt incredibly sick. I couldn't eat. I had like mouth sores. I was just like
Mm.
going through it. Another thing happened. I was like, I was moving at the time, and then I was driving the moving truck, and I got into a random accident, which like took off the roof of the truck. And this was like the same week.
Oh my
All
God.
happening through the same week. I think there was about seven things. I don't remember everything if I check my journal, but we had like two banking challenges, and like, all of that was just like going on. And sometimes you just ask yourself that, man, what did you do to
To deserve it.
to deserve
Yeah.
this? Things are already like hard enough. Like, why? I think for me at that time, I just took a second to just recognize that, okay, all these things is going on. How can we? Everything is just like a problem to solve. I was like, okay, cool. Let's start solving the problem one by one.
Welcome to Pinnacle Code, where we spotlight high achievers in the culture and decode how they got to where they are today. I'm your host, Ben Arthur. Excited to be joined by Sefunmi Osinaike. He is a tech entrepreneur, the co-founder of Co.Lab, an online school and learning platform that helps non-traditional and diverse tech talent break into the tech space and kind of carve their own lane. The program has helped over 1,000 people in 50 different countries land jobs at places like Apple, Amazon, and Google. The program also boasts a completion rate of over 90%. So this is kind of a respected global school, really, and super excited to have Shefumi on the program, and he's was honored on the Forbes under 30 list a couple years ago. So he's truly a disruptor in the tech space and hails from Nigeria as well. Shifumi, thanks so much for joining the show. How's it going?
Good. How's it going? Great. Thank you so much for that very kind intro. So it's weird sometimes listening to all those things as it's being said. But yeah, I'm super happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share and answer the questions that you might have.
Absolutely, yeah. And thanks again for coming on and let's kind of dive in, right? So I want to kind of start with your upbringing a little bit. I know you're, as I said, born and raised in Nigeria.
Yeah.
You moved over to Canada, and I believe right now you're based in New York City.
Yeah.
But with Nigeria, what do people need to know about your upbringing there to understand the guy talking to me today? A tech entrepreneur, really a disruptor today.
Yes, this is a very good question. Yeah, so yeah, like you said, it's been majority of my life in still the majority of my life I spent it in Nigeria growing up. And I think I grew up in Lagos, and I went to military school for high
Mm,
school. So I think that um that gave me a lot of like strong foundations in terms of like the discipline involved in like having to act a certain way. But I think one amazing thing about Nigeria that you notice is like everyone is extremely entrepreneurial, like similar to New York, like how everyone's like hustling.
mm,
In Nigeria, everyone has one hustle or the other, whether it's like they're selling food, they're selling clothes, they're selling like something. So I was surrounded by that like completely. Like everyone that I knew, I had aunts and uncles that dabbled in like business or entrepreneurship. It wasn't like tech entrepreneurship. I don't think like
mm,
I was as exposed to the tech industry or even the internet as back home. I mean, we'd use the internet, but not for like maybe like going on Facebook or something, not for trying to like learn how to code or like try
mm,
to like build something. I don't think like curiosity got to that stage. But I think just being surrounded by people looking for opportunities beyond what they see in their jobs or their opportunities around them, like I think it was really inspiring. And I think just naturally you just understand that, at some point in your life, sort of like a rite of passage, you would also do something entrepreneurial just to supplement your income just because of just how the economy is. So I'll say like that's one of like the biggest influences like that at military school. I love the fact that I went because I think it gave me like very strict way of just looking at life, being surrounded by people with different walks of life. I think it was a very diverse school, from people all around the country and different like income classes. So you get to just really just kind of rub shoulders with everyone, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
Yeah, I feel like your background was perfect to kind of molding who you are, right? Because of the military background, the discipline, but also being around a whole bunch of hustlers, right? You need both to really become a successful entrepreneur, which you've become today. You spoke a moment ago about just not really being exposed to tech. I mean, you had like Facebook and whatnot, but you weren't really exposed at a high level to tech. So what was maybe the inspiration or the draw to wanting to make your life out of that space?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think you hear a lot of entrepreneurs, like their stories, especially in this part of the world. It's like, oh, I started learning how to code when I was 8, or when I was 6. It was a computer, and then I used it. In my home, we had one computer for the entire home, and I think it was just limited to, like, I'll type on Microsoft Word. Again, a lot of like the assignments weren't like typed out on paper. I think back then I just used to use email. Again, like I said, on Facebook, didn't really do much on the internet. I don't think I was like as curious, or people around me weren't talking about like, hey, there's these things you can do. Maybe I will also play games on it. So I think at that time, I think the closest thing that started to pique my interest was BlackBerry.
Mm,
And I was like, wow, this is very fascinating. Like I loved it. And like we had BBM, and we would like ping each other back and forth,
yeah.
if you remember. And so I loved BlackBerry. I used one, and I used it to connect with my friends. Um, but then it didn't dawn on me until my mom gave me a pamphlet for the University of Waterloo, which is the college I eventually went to. And while reading that pamphlet, I read that the person who started BlackBerry who went to the school. And I was just like,
Mm,
wait, like this, like the people who, like, it didn't seem so far out of reach that you can go to a school and you can leave that school and eventually build something that could be used by lots of people. So I think that to me was like very interesting. I remember being very interested in that, amongst other things in the brochure. So I was like, I want to go to this university. And even going into this university, I didn't go in with like, hey, I'm going to like transition into the tech industry, because again, the context that I lived in, the biggest
mm,
problem wasn't like tech and interacting with each other or solving. Like one of the biggest problems that I experienced growing up was the lack of electricity in Nigeria. And that was what I wanted to fix, which is why I studied electrical engineering. It wasn't
mm.
like, hey, I want to study computer science because I wanted to code or make games or make a social network. It was like, hey, we don't have electricity. Let's fix this problem. And then so I got admission to University of Waterloo, which was great. And that was like, my entry into Canada. And now I got exposed to like the tech industry, like everyone around me, like was coding. Like I didn't even understand how code worked at that time. I took my first computer science class. I was terrible at it. But you had people who were coding since like high school. And it was very intimidating, but it was also very exciting at the same
Yeah.
time. And
Okay.
while I was like still on this path of like, oh, I need to solve this electricity problem, it wasn't a technical problem to solve. It was like a political problem to solve. It like electricity is a solved problem. Like the US, Canada, every other developed nation has solved that like 20 years ago, like 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a technological problem. But then I'd been surrounded by a lot of people who now I felt like I could use technology to solve a smaller problem that they'd experienced. So I was like, hey, how about I dabble in technology, learn how to build apps to try and solve other smaller problems, which I ended up doing in university. And that kind of like interested me. I was like, okay, great. I'm going to be in this tech industry, and then let's sort of like figure it out.
Wow, no, that's a super cool story. And speaking of getting like immersed in tech as soon as you arrived in Canada, I know in some of the old interviews you've done, you've talked about just like the challenges of uh whether it's applying for jobs, really truly breaking into the tech space as an immigrant from Nigeria and being a black professional. Um, what exactly were those challenges that you faced?
Yeah, so we faced a couple. So and I say we because it just wasn't me. Number one, when we came over to Canada, there was like a bunch of us. I think there was maybe like 30 of us, not just from Nigeria, but from a bunch of other different countries. And we were in the engineering department. And not only are you like experiencing like a new country, experiencing a new education system, you're experiencing like new ways of like learning. And we were all high performers in our own like respective ways from like our previous home countries. But I think we're faced with like a different challenge. And I think with Waterloo specifically, the one thing that was very peculiar about it is you have to apply for internships while also trying to like navigate the school system. So it was this two things that you're trying to do at once. So a very scary fact that happened was like after our first semester, around 80% of those international students unfortunately failed the first year. So
Wow.
which meant they had to retake the year, switch schools, or completely like switch programs. And that was like tough, even just for me to experience. Luckily, I was one of them that like that made it to the second semester, but then now the struggle of jobs came in, and then we had to figure out how to put together a resume. We didn't have experience. Again, folks, my peers and my classmates, they had worked like part-time jobs, whether it was like in retail or in food, like the food industry, or just like working as a clerk somewhere over one summer, versus like we were coming from zero, like nothing.
Mm.
So it was a lot of trial and error to try and like figure out like how do you land an internship. I know a good, even like my friend group, like the closest friends that I ended up with, like all of us didn't get a job based off of the regular portal that we used to like apply for like tech jobs or tech internships. We all had to find one way or another. One of them, he didn't even, he just like wrote off the summer and just like decided to like learn stuff on his own. I was lucky enough to like, again, going back to like the hustle mentality, I like reached out to like a bunch of upper years who introduced me to someone who had the startup. Uh,
Mhm.
and I was like, hey, I want to work for a startup. I'll do anything. Like I don't know much, but like I'll learn. Um, because I also wanted that co-op credit. So I think for me it was a little bit of like networking to be able to try and make it happen. Um, and I think then it showed me the importance of like who you know and connecting with people instead of just like dumping in your application. Because again, my application was nothing. Like I only had like my grades, which weren't very good, the courses that I took, which I wasn't super interested in. So it's like, how could I even compete?
Yeah.
So that was very difficult. Not to mention like I don't want to say the language barrier, but like I had a thicker accent back then, so you could obviously tell that he's not from here. Culturally, you're still trying to like get acclimatized to the system. So I feel like there were a lot of things against me, things that I wasn't even aware of that like would be against me. But ultimately, I just kept going. I just kept like trying to figure out like my way. And yeah, the first person who gave me a job was based off of a friend who asked another friend who had a startup
Mm.
to say, hey, if you can. And I was like, whatever I can do to like get this experience. And then I think it became slightly easier after that. Like once you get your first role, it becomes like easier and better. But yeah, that's sort of like how I was able to like navigate the
Yeah.
turmoil of job search, being a new immigrant, being in a new environment. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many layers to that. The immigrant thing, the black professional thing. Um, I'm wondering, Shifumi, like, do you think are you like appreciative for kind of what those experiences forced you to become? Because a lot of, I mean, I think some people can maybe shut down from experiences like that. And as you said, what it was like 80% of the international group of international people you came in with kind of fell off for various reasons, but you were one of that 20%. You were able to finally break in from a friend of whatever. Did you appreciate what that made you become? I mean, that kind of set the foundation for what you are now.
Um, it's interesting to think about because when you're going through it, you never think that like, oh, this is great. I'm glad. Like nobody wants a difficult life, and I'll tell you, even then, I did not want a difficult life. I did not want suffering, or I didn't want those challenges. But as you said, like challenges do make you who you are today. It increases your tolerance level for pain, for discomfort, for uncertainty. And I think that that is required to do anything great in this life. I remember I think like recently the CEO of Nvidia has been doing a lot of speaking engagements, and what he said was he was talking to the Stanford class, and he was like, in order to get to where you want to go to, and if you want success, he wishes you pain and suffering. And it's very difficult to hear that. Like, why would you wish anyone pain and suffering? But ultimately, it's through pain and suffering that you actually maintain and develop some form of persistence to keep going and to keep moving forward despite how difficult it is, and it can help you with whatever conviction that you had. So I think going through those challenges, if like I remember a while back I said one of the hardest things that I've ever done was going through the University of Waterloo, because again I was fighting for my life every single semester, whether it was like to like make sure I get the right grades or make sure I get a job or core credit or write like a work term report. It was very difficult. Like at that time, I felt that was the most difficult thing
Hmm.
I'd ever done. But I made it. Like looking back, it's been over 7 years since I've graduated. Yes, I guess seven this year, and it's like okay, that wasn't so bad. Now I'm like doing the startup, which again is like hard in so many ways. And I don't think this is going to be the hardest thing that I'll ever do. There'll be other difficult things, and you sort of build on your resilience to do amazing things and like not give up. So I think like that helped me for sure. Like going through challenges, going through difficult times, and because yeah, if one thing Jay-Z said that I liked is like, hey, the genius thing we didn't do is that we did is like we didn't give up, right? It's like once you just keep going, if you just you if you live long enough, you would eventually see good things happen to you and success happen. In most cases, not every case. Um, so I've and another thing that I also realized is like despite going through difficult times, there are also very good times as well. And I don't think we take time, like even myself included, I don't take the time to recognize how important those good things are. Because when good things happen to us, we don't ask ourselves, why me? Right? We never do, right? Like even getting to Waterloo was prestigious.
Mhm.
Passing, graduating was prestigious. Working at some of the companies that I ended up working at and meeting the people was prestigious, right? So whenever I have very difficult times where I didn't do this or I didn't get this or I didn't get like I shouldn't question why me then. So I think I'm trying to like reframe any experience that I go through because again, a lot of people have it way worse that I do.
Yeah.
So it's important to just remember that like despite going through hard times, easier times will eventually come. As cliche as that sounds, like that is sort of like um how I feel. Because even with like work right now, like there are good months and there are bad months, and the bad months seem like the worst things. Like if you ask me, like last month, I was really going through it regarding. I know it took us so long to schedule this, but like I was really going through it last month because like the company stuff, blah, blah, so much drama. But like this month has been great. I'm like, oh, cool, this is great. Like entrepreneurship, So it's a constant cycle. But yeah, it builds character and it just lets you know that hey, don't give up. Just keep at it. I know that was a very long answer, but hopefully that made some sense.
No, no, that was great, and I want to kind of go to something you said. You talked about like taking the moment to like reframe some of those experiences, and what it sounds like is just kind of being grateful for everything, right? Like the good and the bad, because it is, as you said, kind of building that character. What is, I guess, your process for reframing it? As you said, is it just learning to be present every day, or do you have an accountability process? What does that look like to make sure you're not maybe getting so overwhelmed that you can maybe be present in the day to day?
Yeah, a couple ways. I'm not great at this yet. I need to get better at it. But let's say, let me give you an example. So there was one year that um there was one year that like we're going through stuff and we were working with this bank, right? It was like a new bank. I'm not gonna say their name, and all of a sudden, like they canceled our account and like no like like all our tools to be able to like access the platform, and like everything else was like failing. um we had it then impacted like our banking challenges, so we had challenges with like our existing bank, and then there was like 10 grand that was missing from our accounts, and there was like
Mm,
another 10 grand that was failing with this credit card. And it's like, why is this like happening? And while that was happening, um I also felt incredibly sick. I couldn't eat. I had like mouth sores. I was just like
mm.
going through it. Another thing happened was like I was moving at the time, and then I was driving the moving truck, and I got into a random accident which like took off the roof of the truck. And this was like the same week, like
Oh my
all
God.
happening through the same week. I think there was about 7 things. I don't remember everything if I check my journal, but we had like 2 banking challenges, and like all of that was just like going on. And sometimes you just ask yourself that like, man, what did you do to
To deserve it.
to deserve this?
Yeah.
Like things are already like hard enough. Like why? And so I think for me at that time, I just like took a second to just recognize that like, um okay, all these things is going on. How can we? Everything is just like a problem to solve. I was like, okay, cool. Let's start solving the problem one by one, right? First of all, call the bank, and then call the credit card company. I transferred a bunch of stuff to my personal credit card, which again became like a whole different challenge. But it's like, okay, cool. You solved that problem. Like if it's damage, whatever, you just like pay for it and just forget about it. So I think it's about breaking it down into little things and
Mhm.
recognizing that like, you know what, sure, all these things happen, but it will pass. And like 2 weeks after that, I was like, I mean, it sucked, but I wouldn't even, yeah, you wouldn't think about it as much. And I know this isn't a great answer, but I'll say like, yeah, just like thinking about everything as a problem to solve. And also just remembering the good times. So one thing that I've also done recently is like on my journal, like I tend to journal a lot. I have a page where I've written out a bunch of my wins. And then I go through it and also ask myself that like when this happened, like I didn't complain. When this happened, like to me, like or to us, like I didn't complain. So why should I have? And you realize that sometimes the good overshadows the bad. Um,
Mhm.
so whenever good things happen to us, we never question it. So it's like going back and recognizing that hey, these amazing good things have happened. Life isn't always going to be smooth. Sure, there's like shitty stuff happening, but maybe it will be fine. Maybe it will work. And yeah, sometimes we'll just like pass. It might be for an extended period of time, but keeping that mindset that hey, things will eventually be good always helps. So I guess that's how I reframe it. But
Yeah.
yeah, said than done. Because honestly, that week I was very, very grumpy. Grumpy. It was a lot of things. Yeah.
No, that's great. Yeah, positive mindset and gratitude, I think, are so important, regardless of circumstances. Uh, to kind of go back a second, to kind of like those challenges you face as you were getting your career, your life started in the world of tech. Um, to my understanding, that was kind of a catalyst to beginning Co.Lab with your business partner Helen. Kind of take me through how you, and to my understanding, she kind of had her own issues as well, just being an Asian woman and kind of her issues as well. So take me through like the action steps from, you know, taking this frustration to creating a platform that can actually help people. What did it take to get from frustration to execution?
Yeah, I like that. Frustration to execution. I absolutely love that. So yeah, I'll tell you so like where it started. So even like the first internship that I mentioned that I got, I don't think I knew exactly what I was doing. I think it took me some time to be able to realize that hey, I wanted to break into tech. And I think that's when I started using Dropbox. I always use the example of like Dropbox as a tool at that time. I went to a technical talk and I loved how they spoke about the products that they built. And Dropbox to me was one of the like amazing inventions. I was like, wow, you can put a file on your phone, it shows up on your computer, and it was like seemed very seamless. So I love that experience. So I wanted to break into Silicon Valley, and when I looked at Silicon Valley, there were not that many people who looked like me, and even just like had my background. Um, like I didn't know how to code, I didn't know how to design, and there were not that many black entrepreneurs. Actually, I didn't know of any black entrepreneurs, to be honest, at that time.
Mm,
So it was just like a bunch of people who didn't look like me, and I was like, man, how am I going to do this? But I had ideas, and I really wanted to push those ideas. It's so interesting that even like in my college, in my university, we had an accelerator, and there was also not black entrepreneurs. I didn't see that many black entrepreneurs as well. So I felt like it was this uphill battle, but I was like, okay, do you know what? I want to do this. And then so I had an idea for a problem that I had experienced. Again, going back to what I said earlier, as an international student, 80% of my friends had to drop out. So I was like, hey, how about we create something that will prevent that from happening? Because it
mm,
was a pretty traumatic thing to go through. So I was like, hey, let's do this. So I had this idea for, it was supposed to be an anti-distraction app. It later morphed into like a time management tool. So to solve the problem of like, hey, not knowing how to code, not knowing how to design, I walked around campus. I spoke to around probably 300 students. And I would like walk up to random strangers and be like, hey, I have an idea. Can I pitch you? And I'll pitch them for like 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And then they'll be like, oh, that's cool. I would use it or I wouldn't use it. I'll like tell them to put in their email, so I could like, collect a lot of like feedback. So I was doing that, and while doing that, I met a couple people who are like, "I love what you're doing. How can I help?" And these were like designers, these were engineers. My roommates also said, they will help me out,
mm.
and I built this team of I think we were like 6 or 7. And over the summer, one summer, this was summer of 2015, now almost 10 years ago, which is crazy. Um, I built an Android app, an iOS app, to solve that problem of like to create this anti-distraction or this time management tool. It was called Pave. And I realized that like, wow, like simple old me was able to come up with an idea and actually execute it. So that was like a huge confidence booster for me. And even though it didn't take off, like we didn't get that many downloads. Like I think we peaked at like maybe 500 downloads, which I think for me was even very impressive at that time, right? And I could see the app on the phone. I could use it, and like I remember exactly how I felt when I got the email that Apple had approved the app, and I told someone, I was like, go to the app and type Pave, and they downloaded it, and I was like, whoa, I felt like
Yeah.
felt like top of the world. So that experience just taught me that like, wow, I can do something. And then even though it didn't take off, I then learned about product management. So I was like, okay, I think product is where I want to go to. And I applied to a bunch of like product management internships. I then landed an internship at Microsoft, which is where I met Helen. And then later on, I went to Apple. So I'm fast tracking the story now to help answer your question. So I started my product career there, and even though like it was still a struggle to even like learn and be comfortable, because I also had a lot of imposter syndrome because I was like, wow, I'm at Microsoft, I don't know what I'm doing. And then I joined Apple, and the imposter syndrome even increased some more. I was like, oh my god, like I'm at like the best company in the world, like do I belong here? So it was at that time I didn't know it was imposter syndrome, but I didn't have people to be like, hey, Shifumi, like let me teach you, let's take you through, let's do this. I was just trying to like navigate that in my own way. I moved back to Canada and then started working at this smart home company called Ecobee. They make like thermostats, like light switches,
Mhm,
smart like cameras. And while I was there my first year, a lot of MBA candidates started reaching out and said, hey, Shufimi, I saw your LinkedIn. You have an impressive background. How'd you become a product manager? So I had like several dozen of these interviews, like in my first year at Ecobee, just like having coffee chats every week, multiple times a week, sometimes just like, hey,
mm.
how do you get into product? How do you get into product? And some of these people look like me, some of these people didn't look like me, but I felt like, wow, okay, lots of people are struggling. Okay, how can I help them? And I was also, again, the only Black person on my product team at the time. I didn't know that many other Black product managers. So it felt like very isolating. It felt like there's a lot of people who don't know exactly what to do. And I gave the same advice over and over again. I reached out to my co-founder then, who's also like my best friend. And I was like, hey, is this happening to you? Are people reaching out? And she's like, yes, because she also has a very unique background. She has an earth science background, and now she was like a full-time product manager. And then so we like put our heads together on like, hey, um, I'm realizing like there isn't any one resource that we could point people to. We can't say, hey, if you want to be a product manager, do these things, you become a product manager. Um, so we're like, hey, what can we do? So we did a lot of research. We decided to be a PM for this PM problem. And we saw that a lot of boot camps existed, but a lot of the boot camps were like theory based, like lots of like theory around like,
Mhm.
oh, this is what you should do. And we're like, we work as product managers. This does not look like the job at all. It's very like, you know, uh, this unrealistic,
Mhm.
euphoric way of
Mhm.
like doing the job, you know. Um, so and it didn't make sense. Like an analogy that I like to think about is like imagine like, oh, they're telling you how to be an athlete, and all they're telling you about is like, oh, you're gonna play in the World Cup final, and you're gonna, like score and play on an amazing team and have an amazing coach, and all this. Like it's just like that's not gonna happen, Um, so we're like, hey, this doesn't make sense. It's like, how about we show a realistic sense? And we felt like, and this was back in 2018, that what will help solve this problem for product managers if we simulate what it feels like to work in the role. And the best form of simulation is going through product strategy and product discovery and problem discovery and working with engineers to execute it. Because that's the job everywhere at Microsoft, at Apple, at any startup. It's like identifying a problem and solving that problem for customers and asking yourself, did you solve that problem for customers? If the answer is no, you go back and you try to solve it. If the answer is yes, okay, what can be improved and you optimize. So that is the cycle of every single product that's out there. Like
Mhm.
how to simplify it. But at that time, 2018, that was seemed very daunting to us. We were still at the early stages of our career. So we said, let's write a book. So we then wrote like I ended up just writing the book by myself called How to Product, which I interviewed 40 product managers and then told 25 stories on how to transition from outside the industry. And then after that book, more people reached out. I had like a couple dozen interviews, but now I had like hundreds of people like email me and message me on LinkedIn saying, hey, I read your book. I need more help. Can you help me? And then I think then I turned that was also another frustration into like an opportunity to then execute on. And that's when I was like, hey, let's run the first cohort of this cross-functional boot camp. And we ran the first cohort in 2020. It went well, and we've continued running cohorts. We're now in like our 45th cohort or something like
Wow.
like made lots of changes, lots of improvements. Like we change something new every cohort. No cohort is the same because we're constantly improving because we think about it as a product. I know that was like really long-winded, but it was like, my frustrations and then other people's frustrations and hearing that. And as a PM, you're supposed to be empathetic. And as an entrepreneur, you're supposed to be empathetic because you want to solve people's problems and then you want to, come up with creative solutions that can help them.
That was fantastic. One thing that seemed to be kind of a trend in terms of getting to the point to with Helen to where you guys have created Co.Lab is just all the conversations you guys had, all the research that went into like really sounds like carefully curating a, a platform that would actually help people, that wasn't theory based, that was very rooted in reality. Like this is what you would actually do, and kind of creating an environment like that. Can you discuss like the because I think there are a lot of people out there that are maybe kind of entrepreneurial minded, but going from that persona to actually creating something that people would love is very difficult. How do you get to the point, or I guess, what can you say about the work that is required to go from something that you think a lot of people would like you have an entrepreneurial, idea or whatever, but actually creating something that becomes as big as Co.Lab has become? Like, what does it take? What is the work ethic required to actually, because you guys are global. Like Co.Lab is literally global, worked with people from over 50 countries. So what does it take to actually go from an idea to achieving something at the scale that Co.Lab has reached?
Yeah, and thank you for that. We're always working and growing, and it's important. I think for me, I always remind myself and remind my team that it's still day one. We still have so much to do. So I wouldn't. Yes, we've achieved some level of success, but there's still so much more that we can do. But I tell people that the first thing that they need to do is talk about their idea or talk about their problem. A lot of people, whenever they have an idea, they're like very secretive of it. They're like, I
Mhm.
don't want anyone to steal my idea, because we've all watched The Social Network and everyone stole Mark Zuckerberg's idea. And I feel like a lot of it is fiction. um, but I think the first thing that you need to do is talk about your idea, but talk about it from the point of trying to understand your customers and trying to understand if it's a problem. So I think that's in every single thing that I've done. Like we spent time, like even with the first product that I worked on that didn't even go anywhere. I spoke to 300 students before I started building anything. With Co.Lab, like that number probably like went up to like 500 like interactions with real people, um, emailing, messaging me on LinkedIn, and collecting insights, and also like going through like forums to see like how people found some of those other existing problems. So understanding and talking about it, I think it's like very important to be able to see if it's viable, because a lot of people, they have an idea and immediately they want to build. They want to like, oh, let's get it out there. But you can do so much and validate so much without even having a product. Yeah. Fun fact and fun story. Like we actually completely recruited the first cohorts before we even built our website, before we even built like our curriculum, before we even had any instructors. Like we had already recruited people because we had validated that this was a problem that people wanted to solve.
Mhm.
And to answer your other question of like, hey, what is it going to take? I always talk about three things that I think every entrepreneur needs. And these three things are like incredibly important for any successful entrepreneur. Like this isn't like I've reflected on these three things a lot. And I've also talked to other founders like at different stages and understanding like this, which is why I've come up with these three things. And I'm convinced like these are actually the three things you need. There might be more, but if I had to distill it, three things. Number one, conviction, right? Conviction is also synonymous with like confidence of knowing that whatever you're working on, you yourself, first of all, it's a real problem, right? Number two, you have what it takes to actually solve that problem. Because again, like over 70% of startups fail. Like huge number of like the chances are like you would fail, but you need to have that conviction that this is a problem, you can solve it, whatnot. The second one is a healthy amount of delusion, right? Which is also connected to the first one. Again, I didn't say delusion, a healthy amount of delusion. Because again,
Uh-huh.
startups fail. Why do you think it's going to be you? Why do you think it's going to be you and your team? Why do I think it was going to be me and Helen? Right? We need to have that delusion that look, we versus every single one of our competitors. Again, like programs existed and platforms existed like before us, right? That had more funding, more experience, like more press, and sometimes you might feel intimidated that like why do I do this? Like how can I do this? But you need that healthy amount of delusion to tell yourself, right? And again, everything is connected, right? The conviction of like this is a problem. I'm sure this is a problem, and I'm sure like I can do it. The delusion of like, yes, doubling down on like it's us, we're going to win. We're not going to be that 70%, we're going to be the 30%. We're not going to fail, we're going to succeed. Whatever it is that we want to do, we're going to do it. And then the third one is persistence, right? The persistence is also now important to help you continue to fuel the delusion and conviction that you have, because you need to just keep going. And the persistence also involves you doing the work to be like, okay, sure, we hit a setback. I told you about the crazy week that I had, like that is like a setback, and you can tell yourself like, hey, why isn't this working? I remember we were trying to recruit our second cohort. I had done three webinars, no one enrolled, and like no one was like enrolling in anything that we wanted to do. And for me, I was like, man, I thought we were done. But Helen looked at me and was like, yo, let's do this. Like, where that persistence, it's is very important so you don't give up. Because once you give up, like majority of the reason why startups fail, outside of the fact that they don't solve a real problem, is yeah, co-founders give up, people just run out of steam, they run out of money, and they're just like, that's it, right? Persistence is what led the founders of Airbnb to sell cereal when they needed money to continue with their startup, and for the founders of DoorDash to sell T-shirts. PayPal earlier on, he sold his household things just to just make ends meet to just try and push this idea forward. Again, those are extreme cases. Again, I don't
Yeah.
think that every it's for everyone. I know friends who have gone into debt, like tens of thousands of dollars in debt to push their startup forward. And again, it worked out for them because eventually, they raised funding and it was great. But that persistence and that conviction and that delusion of like, look, I'm going to go $30,000 in the negative because I know that moving forward is going to be sorted out. Again, healthy amount of delusion. But I'll say like those three things is what I find. But again, don't be too in over your head, because even from myself, when I wanted to quit my full-time job, because I had a great job, I had a great setup, like I was
Mhm.
living like a good comfortable life before I decided to. So I went to therapy and I was like asking my therapist, hey, am I in over my head? I'm about to quit my really great job to do this startup full time. It's like, because like I couldn't tell my parents, because like they were like, I don't think they would have like supported me at that time, and I didn't think I wanted anything negative. So that healthy amount of delusion, being able to check yourself, and I think I went through an exercise with my therapist that allowed me to realize that okay, cool, you can actually quit your job, and yeah, look, multiple years later, I'm still surviving. So yeah.
When you did have that cushy job, what was it about Co.Lab, or just the idea of kind of building something that transcended whatever comfort that you felt from that job you had? Was it that mission to that we've talked about, like just in terms of diversifying tech and helping people who are kind of in situations like you to build a life for themselves in tech? Was it that got you through? What was it to where you felt like this is what I have to do? Like there's kind of no going back.
Yeah, honestly, it's a combination of a lot of factors. To be honest, there wasn't one particular thing. I think it was like a mixture of things. Number one, we started collab after like, or in the heat of the Black Lives Matter movement. So that was in 2020. So that was happening, and I looked around me and I realized that like, man, like we have a long way to go and there aren't that many spaces for us. And no matter how much, even if I have this cushy job, um, excuse me, things will still be extremely difficult for me, no matter what I tell myself. So I
Mhm.
think that was one. I realized that a lot of other people have it worse. So that was one. Number two, I felt like I understood my job very well, and I felt like I could also get another job if I wanted to. That I knew, like I was like, okay, cool. I wasn't like at the top of my career in product, but I was like, I was doing well, and I was on track to even do better. And I realized that like, this seems like it's going to be the same thing, you
Mm.
know. How about I try to do something that I don't know how to do, right? Again, I don't know how to start a company. I don't know how to raise money. I don't know how to like lead a team. I don't know how to fend for myself. So that also seemed like an interesting problem and challenge to solve for myself. And the third, like I legit had people, and I think it's different when like in education and in a company like ours, like you're dealing with individual lives. It's not like a software product that you can just be like, oh, there's like 10 million people and it's just a number. You're actually dealing with the individual person who has very unique skills, unique backgrounds. And when they're telling you, hey, help me, 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 you start to feel some sense of responsibility.
Mm.
So I don't think everyone should like take on anyone's cross. And I don't think that's like something I want to like promote, but I think it was there. The opportunity was staring me right in the face.
Mhm.
I felt like, why not try to do whatever you can? Because I also felt like I had it within myself to also help them. And it's like when you can help someone and you absolutely can, like, why not? Like, um, I mean, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, just like a trivial thing to do, because it does take a lot of work to like set up the things that we've done. But I felt like, again, it's within our capacity, and as humans you need to help other people when you can. So I think those combination of things, while the world was also like dying, it was during COVID, you're like, your life has to mean something,
Yeah,
so like,
yeah.
it wasn't any one thing, it was like a combination of stuff, that I was like, do you know what, let's do this. Let's take a chance. Yeah. So that's how it is. So I guess the summary is like Black Lives Matter, wanting to do better, wanting to better myself, do something that I haven't done before. There was like the opportunity here. People were dying, and I just wanted to just like make my life count. Right. So those five things, and yeah, we're still doing that till today.
Absolutely. And as I kind of said earlier, like you've helped people through Co.Lab, like you and Helen help people through at least 50 different countries, probably more to this point. When I saw that number, that was in January. We're recording this in May. But you said when I kind of brought that up, you said like there's more work that needs to be done. So what is the goal? Like you already have this massive global presence. What is kind of the North Star, so to speak?
Yeah, so for updated numbers, we're now at 1,500 at 60 plus countries. I think like 65 countries now.
Oh
So
wow.
it's like when you get to that point, you just like be like, oh, 50 plus and 60 plus. So I think we've
Yeah.
stopped counting as much.
Yeah, that's
So
okay.
we're at 1,500. I think we're scheduled to do an additional 1,000 before the end of the year, which would be great. So that's really interesting. And I think the reason why I'm like, hey, we're not done yet is so there are a couple things. Like the market is actually going through a very tough time right now, and hiring. I think hiring is broken, because hiring relies on a bunch of factors outside of your experience and outside of what you bring to the table. And then I think that there's a lot of work to influence companies on how they hire people, because in hiring is done by referrals, and if the people who are referring like are all the same like class, kind, color, you just find that like you get the same sets of people, which isn't very like equitable,
Hmm.
despite other people who might have the skills. So there's a lot of work to do there besides just training and besides like upskilling. I think like we want to make sure like we reduce that gap that
Hmm.
happens between like, okay, you need to acquire the skills or you need to be able to learn the job, because there are a lot of people who are very, and I think we've seen that with the rounds of layoffs happening right now. There is a lot of people right now who are skilled, who have the experience, but still can't get the job, right?
Hmm.
So it's like, what is it that's the problem? And I think there's a bunch of different ways to solve that problem, whether it's like creating like enabling these companies to just like be more equitable. But there's also the path of entrepreneurship right now, which I do think like it's easier than ever to start not necessarily like a venture scale company, but a decent sized company that can actually generate like enough income for you to be able to take care of yourself and your family. And so the bet that we're sort of making is like, in the future, in the next couple of years, individuals will make successful 6 and 7 figure businesses, while others will actually build like amazing businesses which will eventually hire people, because you need that cycle of like, people need to like create companies, and then those companies need to hire people, and then
Hmm.
it helps the workforce. So it's gone beyond just like, hey, we just need to like upskill people, to like, hey, how can we actually create this cycle of an economy that helps one another? Because if companies are started through collab, then potentially they will come back and hire folks who went through it, similar to like how any institution goes. Like, you go to Harvard Business School, you start a company, and then you hire interns from Harvard Business School, and that cycle. So it's all about like, how do we do that in like a sustainable and scalable way? I think that would be great to be able to do. It is a lot of work, but we're trying our best to understand where the opportunity lies.
Mhm.
It's a very difficult problem to solve compared to even just like getting people the skills or getting people a job.
Sure, and I'm sure that that keeps you guys motivated, right? Trying to solve a difficult problem like that, and much kudos to you and Helen for the work that y'all are doing. Uh, I guess kind of winding down here, where can people go to learn more, not only about Co.Lab and potentially get involved, but also to maybe follow you on social media to see what's going on?
Yeah, so I'm active on LinkedIn. I try to write every day, although May has been a bit, or this month has been like a bit crazy. But I try to write every day, and I think that is my plan. So LinkedIn, Sefunmi Osinaike is just my full name. You can find me there, and just like comment or send me a DM. I try my best to respond. But yeah, I'll say LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about Co.Lab, just go to our website www.joincolab.io. So joincolab.io. And yeah, you can see all the amazing cool stuff that not just we're doing, but some of our learners are doing as well.
Terrific. And everyone listening, all that information will be in the show notes. So be sure to tap in with all of that. Last question for you. I ask all my guests this at the end. It's kind of broad, so bear with me. But what is one thing that you believe people can do more of to get a step closer to reaching their pinnacle, their personal pinnacle, or maximizing their own potential?
Um, One thing that they could do more of, I would say just be consistent. Um, Small acts, however small they are, if done consistently, make a difference and can actually put you ahead of people significantly. So it's just about continuing to be disciplined enough to do that small thing every day. Like even like for example, if you want to read, if you read for 10 minutes every day, like at the end of the year, you would have been way smarter than you are today. So small acts done consistently, I think it's actually how people make a difference in their lives, and that's how to even build a routine. That's how to be healthy. So the consistent nature of things is what does make a difference, and you also increase your odds when you show up every day. You increase your odds to just like be better, to experience new things. So I always tell everyone, if you want to do anything, just work on consistency. Well, start first of all. Once you start working consistency, and with consistency, surely you will get better. And then once you get better, like you become a subject matter expert, and then you can take it from there.
Terrific. Shefumi, thank you so much. Everyone listening, this has been another episode of Pinnacle Code. And as always, I will see you guys next week. Peace out.
Thank you so much. It was so nice having you. Bye.
Appreciate it.